For most of my life, I believed my grandfather was the safest person I'd ever known. If someone had asked me to describe him, I would have smiled without hesitation. Gentle, patient, the kind of man who always carried peppermints in his coat pocket because he never wanted a child to leave his house empty-handed. He built birdhouses every spring. He remembered every birthday. He cried at weddings. And every Christmas Eve, he was always the last person to leave the table because he insisted on washing every single dish himself. To me, he wasn't just family. He was the reason I believed good people existed. That's why what happened 3 weeks ago broke something inside me that I don't think will ever heal. Because sometimes, the people who teach you what goodness looks like are also the people hiding the darkest secrets. Welcome to Stories of the Unbroken. If stories about hidden family secrets, impossible choices, and finding the courage to face painful truth speak to you, you're in the right place. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and let's begin. My name is Caroline Hayes. I'm 33 years old. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, no thunderstorms, no strange phone calls. Just an afternoon that looked exactly like every other afternoon. I had taken the day off work. I work as a physical therapist, and after 6 straight days at the clinic, all I wanted was silence. I made coffee, opened my laptop, lit 2 candles, one for my father, one for my older brother. It had become my ritual. Every year around this time, I spent an hour remembering the people I'd lost. I never considered it religious. It was simply my way of saying, I still remember you. My father had died from a heart attack 8 years earlier. My brother had been killed by a drunk driver. Those candles helped me feel connected to them. There was always one more candle, the 3rd candle, for my grandfather, Arthur. He had died 4 years ago after a long battle with cancer. Every year I lit that candle with the others, every year, until this one. Because before I could strike the match, my phone buzzed. It was my cousin, Rachel. We weren't especially close anymore. Life had taken us in different directions. Still, family was family. I answered. She didn't even say hello. Emily. Her voice sounded wrong, like she'd been crying for hours. I need to tell you something. I remember laughing nervously. What happened? There was silence, long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't disconnected. Then she whispered something that made absolutely no sense. I don't think Grandpa was the man we thought he was. I frowned. What are you talking about? More silence. Then, I found Aunt Linda's journals. I knew those journals. Everyone did. My Aunt Linda had died from breast cancer nearly 15 years earlier. She kept diaries her entire life. Boxes of them. Thousands of handwritten pages. Nobody had ever read them after she died. They'd stayed in Grandma's attic all those years. Rachel had apparently been helping Grandma clean the house after deciding to move into assisted living. That's when she'd found them. I only meant to see if there were family recipes, Rachel said quietly, but I found something else. Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. What? She took a shaky breath. There were pages about Grandpa. I smiled despite myself. Well, of course there were. No, another pause. Not like that. Suddenly the room felt colder. What did she write? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked a question. Do you remember how Aunt Linda always refused to be alone with Grandpa? I blinked. No. You don't remember? I searched my memory. Family reunions, birthdays, Thanksgivings. She was always distant, always polite, never affectionate. I had assumed that was simply her personality. Rachel continued. I never noticed either. Another pause. Until I read what she wrote. I stood up without realizing it. What did she write? Rachel's breathing became uneven. She wrote, then her voice broke completely, that Grandpa started touching her when she was 8. Everything inside me stopped. Not slowed, stopped. No. I wish I was lying. No. I wish I hadn't read it. I started shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. Rachel. There are dozens of entries. No. She describes everything. No. She wrote that she told Grandma. I couldn't breathe. What? Grandma knew. I dropped into the nearest chair. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. No. Rachel was crying openly now. Emily, no! Grandma told her not to tell anyone. The room blurred. I looked at the 3 candles sitting on the kitchen table. One for Dad, one for my brother, one for Grandpa. Suddenly, I couldn't remember why I'd ever loved that 3rd candle. This can't be real. I know. There has to be some explanation. I thought so too. Maybe she misunderstood. Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she said something that would haunt me for weeks. There are 43 entries. 43. Not 1, not 2, 43. Written over years. The same details, the same fear, the same nightmares, the same secret. I felt sick. Actually sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Afterward, I sat on the floor for almost 20 minutes, staring at the tiles, trying to make my brain reject what I'd just heard. Grandpa couldn't be that person. He just couldn't. He taught me to ride a bicycle. He held my hand at Dad's funeral. He drove me to college. He cried when I graduated. People like that don't do things like this, do they? Rachel finally spoke again. There's something else. I almost didn't ask. What? There are entries about another aunt. My stomach dropped. Aunt Susan? I think so. What do you mean you think? Linda never says her name. Then how do you know? Because she keeps writing. Rachel swallowed. I'm scared he'll do to my little sister what he did to me. I closed my eyes. Susan had always been different, quiet, anxious. She'd never married, never had children. She barely attended family gatherings. I'd always assumed she was shy. Now, I wasn't so sure. What does Susan say? Rachel hesitated. I asked her. And? She refused to answer. Maybe because none of it's true. Rachel said something so quietly I almost missed it. Emily, what? She didn't deny it. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, I whispered, What do we do? Rachel answered with the same question I'd been asking myself ever since. I don't know. After we hung up, I stared at the 3rd candle for a very long time. I wanted to light it. I wanted everything to go back to the way it had been an hour earlier, but my hand wouldn't move. Instead, I picked up Grandpa's framed photograph from the bookshelf, the smiling man I'd loved my entire life. I searched his eyes for something, anything, some sign that Rachel had misunderstood, some clue I'd missed, some proof that this wasn't real. Then I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. In that photo, Grandpa wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at someone standing just outside the frame, someone I couldn't see. And for the first time in 33 years, that smile didn't comfort me. It frightened me, because I suddenly realized there were people in my family who had never looked at that smile the way I had. They'd looked at it and remembered something completely different. I didn't sleep that night, not because I kept thinking about what Rachel had told me, because I kept remembering things I'd never questioned before. Memory is a strange thing. It doesn't disappear, it waits. And sometimes, one terrible truth rearranges every memory you've ever trusted. By 3 a.m, I was sitting on my living room floor surrounded by old family photo albums. I don't even remember taking them down from the closet. I just remember flipping through page after page with shaking hands. Christmases, birthdays, camping trips, summer barbecues, Grandpa smiling in every single picture, children gathered around him, me, Rachel, my cousins, my aunts. Then I noticed something I had never seen before. Aunt Linda was almost never next to him, not once, in hundreds of photographs. If everyone gathered together, she'd somehow end up on the opposite side. If he put an arm around the grandchildren, she was standing near Grandma. Always. Every time. I kept turning pages faster. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe I was looking for patterns that weren't there. Then I found one photograph that made my stomach twist. It was taken during my 10th birthday party. I remembered that day perfectly. The backyard was full of balloons. Grandpa had built me a tree swing. I thought it was the greatest gift in the world. In the picture, everyone was smiling, except one person, Aunt Susan. She wasn't looking at the camera. She wasn't smiling. She was staring directly at Grandpa, not with anger, not with sadness, with fear. Real fear. The kind of fear you can't fake. I had looked at that photograph dozens of times over the years. I'd never noticed. Or maybe I'd never wanted to. My phone buzzed just after 7. It was Mom. For a second, I wondered if Rachel had already called her. Maybe she'd told everyone. Maybe the family secret had finally exploded. I answered. "Morning, sweetheart." Her voice sounded completely normal. Too normal. "Morning. You sound tired." "I didn't sleep well." "You working today?" "No." "Good." She hesitated. "I was thinking—" My chest tightened. "Your grandmother could use some help sorting through old boxes." There it was, the attic, the journals. Did she know Rachel had found them? Or was this just terrible timing? "I don't know. It won't take long. I'll think about it." There was another pause. Then Mom said something that made every hair on my arm stand up. "If you find anything—" She stopped. "Old—" Another pause. "Don't read it." Silence. "What?" "Oh," she laughed nervously. "You know how people write emotional things in journals." "I suppose. They don't always mean what they write." I stopped breathing. She knew. She absolutely knew. I hadn't mentioned journals. Rachel hadn't told her. Yet somehow, Mom had. "Mom?" "Yes?" "What journals?" The silence lasted barely 2 seconds, but it was enough. Enough for me to hear panic. "Oh," she laughed again. "Your grandmother always kept journals." "No. I just assumed. I wasn't talking about Grandma." She didn't answer. I stood up. "Mom!" "What?" "Why did you tell me not to read them?" "I didn't." "You literally just did." "You misunderstood." "I don't think I did." Her voice changed. Not louder, colder. "There are some things families don't need to reopen." There it was. Not denial, not confusion, not surprise, just acceptance. My heart started pounding. "What things?" "They happened a long time ago." I nearly dropped the phone. "What happened?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about." "No." "Rachel called you." It wasn't a question. I whispered, "You knew?" Long silence. Then, "Emily." "No." "Listen to me." "No." "It wasn't that simple." My knees almost gave out. "It wasn't that simple?" "I didn't say it was okay." "But you knew." "I was a child too." Those 6 words stopped me. I was a child too. I'd never thought about that. Mom was only 11 years older than Aunt Linda. If Linda had been 8, Mom would have been 19. No, wait. The math didn't work. I grabbed a notebook. Linda had been born in 1962. Mom, 1958. Only 4 years older. That meant Mom was 12. Just 12. A child herself. "I didn't know what to do," Mom whispered. "I was 12. I sat back down. Everything suddenly became more complicated. She wasn't the adult I'd imagined. She'd been another child inside the same house. He told Grandma. And? She cried. "Then what?" Mom's voice became distant. "Then nothing." "What do you mean, nothing?" "No police." "No?" "No doctors. No relatives. No church. Nothing?" "Nothing." I couldn't understand. "How?" "Because it was 1970. So?" "You have no idea what families were like back then." "That's not an excuse." "I know." "Then why?" Mom started crying. Real crying. "The whole family depended on him." I frowned. "What?" "He owned the business." "So?" "The house." "What?" "The savings. The farm. Everything." "If Grandma left him—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. There would have been nothing. No money, no home, no future. "I hated her for staying," Mom whispered. "I still do sometimes." My anger stumbled, not disappeared, just complicated itself. "You should have protected Linda." "I couldn't even protect myself." "What does that mean?" She was quiet again, long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Finally, "He never touched me." Relief flooded me. Then she added, "But I lived in that house too." The relief vanished. "You knew every day." "Yes." "You heard her crying." "Yes." "You saw—" "Emily." I've spent 50 years trying to forget. I leaned against the kitchen counter. My whole world felt upside down. I'd called Mom a coward in my head all morning. Now I wasn't sure what she was. Victim, witness, survivor, enabler, maybe all four. I don't know what to think anymore. Neither do I. Then she said something that chilled me. Don't ask Susan. What? Leave her alone. Why? Because she finally found peace. Did he? I said, don't ask. The call ended, not because we agreed, because she'd hung up. I stared at my phone for several minutes. One conversation, and somehow the story had become even darker. Because now I wasn't looking at one monster. I was looking at an entire family that had learned to survive around one. Around noon, Rachel texted me, "Can you meet me?" 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a quiet coffee shop. She looked exhausted. She slid a small leather notebook across the table. A copy. What? I photographed some pages. I stared at it. I don't know if I should read them. I didn't think I should either. She looked around to make sure no one was listening. Then she whispered, "There's something in there I didn't tell you." My stomach dropped. What? The abuse, she swallowed, wasn't the biggest secret. I felt the blood drain from my face. What could possibly be worse? Rachel looked me straight in the eyes. Linda wrote that someone else knew. I know. Grandma. Rachel slowly shook her head. No. Another pause. It was someone we both still see every Christmas. I felt my heart stop. What? She leaned even closer. The journals say Grandpa had help. I stared at her, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to understand. Help? Rachel nodded once. Then she opened the notebook to a page she'd marked with a yellow tab, and the first sentence I read made me question every single person I'd ever called family. I couldn't make myself read the page, not immediately. My fingers rested on the edge of the notebook while my mind desperately searched for another explanation. Maybe Aunt Linda had misunderstood. Maybe grief had changed her memories. Maybe trauma had blurred names and faces. Anything. Anything except what Rachel had just suggested. Read it, she whispered. I don't know if I can. I didn't want to either. The coffee shop around us faded into background noise. People laughed. Espresso machines hissed. Someone dropped a spoon. Normal life continued while mine quietly came apart. Finally, I lowered my eyes to the page. The handwriting was elegant, careful, almost painfully neat. At the top was a date, October 14th, 1983. Dear Diary, today Mom told me again that keeping quiet protects the family. I almost believed her. Then Uncle David looked at me the way he always does. He knows. He's always known. He never stops him. He just leaves the room. I don't know which one of them scares me more anymore. I stopped reading. What? Rachel nodded slowly. I know. No. I checked the dates. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint. Uncle David? My mother's older brother. The funny uncle. The one who taught all of us how to fish. The one who never missed a birthday. No. Rachel reached across the table. I don't think he hurt anyone. Then what? I think, she hesitated, he knew. I looked back at the page. Further down, another sentence had been underlined. Sometimes silence hurts more than hands. I swallowed hard. I suddenly remembered Uncle David at every family gathering, always leaving early, always drinking too much, always avoiding eye contact with Grandpa. I thought they simply had different personalities. Now, maybe I'd misunderstood that too. Rachel took a deep breath. There's more. I almost laughed. Of course there is. She opened another photograph on her phone, another journal page. This one was dated nearly 6 years later. I read the first line. Susan won't speak anymore. My stomach twisted. The next sentence hit even harder. The doctor says she's depressed. Nobody tells him why. I closed my eyes. Aunt Susan, quiet, withdrawn, afraid. All those years, everyone had called her the sensitive one. Nobody had ever asked why, or maybe they had, and nobody had answered. Rachel spoke carefully. I found hospital paperwork too. What kind? For Susan. When? 1989. I frowned. She would have been 16. What happened? Rachel looked down. It says, she struggled to get the words out, attempted suicide. I couldn't breathe. What? She survived. No one ever told us. They buried it. I stared at the table. I was beginning to understand something terrifying. This wasn't one secret. This was decades of secrets, layer after layer, every generation carrying the weight of the one before. I have to talk to Susan. Rachel shook her head immediately. Mom told me not to. My mom said the same thing. So maybe we shouldn't. I looked toward the window. Cars passed outside. People walked dogs. A little girl laughed as her father chased her across the sidewalk. Life looked so unbelievably normal. I wondered how many families around us carried stories no one could imagine. Rachel interrupted my thoughts. Emily? What? I think Grandma knows we found the journals. Why? She called me 3 times this morning. And? I didn't answer. Did she leave messages? Rachel nodded. Play them. She unlocked her phone. The first voicemail was short. Rachel, sweetheart, call me when you can. Nothing unusual. The second sounded more urgent. Honey, please don't read those notebooks. My stomach tightened. The third message was different. Grandma sounded frightened, actually frightened. Rachel, please. A long pause. Something should stay buried. I felt anger rise in my chest. Buried. Again. Everything buried. Everything hidden. Everyone protecting everyone except the children who had actually been hurt. I can't do this anymore, I whispered. Rachel looked at me. What are you thinking? I'm going to see Grandma. Today? Right now. Rachel grabbed my wrist. Don't go alone. Why? What if... She hesitated. What if there are things you don't want to hear? I gave a bitter smile. I don't think that ship has already sailed. The drive to Grandma's house took 40 minutes. 40 of the longest minutes of my life. The closer I got, the more memories returned. Learning to bake cookies in her kitchen, sleeping over during summer vacations, watching old movies on rainy afternoons. Everything about that little white house had once felt safe. Now, it felt like the place where the truth had been buried alive. Grandma answered the door almost immediately. She looked older than I'd remembered, smaller. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the screen door. Emily, she smiled. It lasted less than a second. Then she saw my face, and the smile disappeared. You know. Not a question. I nodded. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she stepped aside. You should come in. The living room hadn't changed in 20 years. The same floral sofa, the same grandfather clock, the same photographs covering every shelf. Grandpa smiling from nearly every frame. I couldn't look at them. Grandma made tea. Neither of us touched it. She sat across from me, folded her hands, looked down. I suppose Rachel found Linda's journals. Yes. Another silence. Then I asked the question that had been burning inside me all day. Why didn't you protect her? Grandma closed her eyes. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. I ask myself that every morning. That isn't an answer. No. Then answer me. She looked at me with eyes that seemed 100 years old. I was afraid. Of what? Him. I frowned. Grandpa? She nodded. I didn't know him anymore. That wasn't the answer I'd expected. What do you mean? He wasn't always... She searched for words. That man. I said nothing. He used to be gentle. The irony almost made me laugh. He volunteered at church. He coached baseball. He read bedtime stories. He loved babies. My voice cracked. I know. She looked directly at me. And then, a long pause, something changed. I leaned forward. What changed? She whispered one sentence. He came back different. From where? She stared toward the window. The war. I blinked. Korea? She nodded slowly. I married one man, another pause, and someone else came home. For a moment, everything became complicated again. Not excused, never excused, but complicated. She wasn't defending him. She wasn't denying anything. She was describing losing the man she'd loved. He wouldn't sleep, she continued almost to herself. He screamed every night. He drank. He became angry. I begged him to get help. There wasn't help back then. I listened quietly. I kept believing he'd become himself again. Did he? She shook her head. No. Then her voice broke completely. And by the time I understood how dangerous he had become, she buried her face in her hands. I already had 4 children. The room fell silent. Finally, I asked the question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. When Linda told you, Grandma's shoulders began shaking. I believed her. Immediately? Immediately. My heart sank. You never doubted her? Never. Then why? My voice rose despite myself. Why didn't you leave? She looked at me with a pain so deep it almost made me look away. Then she whispered words I'll never forget. Because he told me, another pause, if I ever took the children away, her breathing became uneven. He'd make sure none of us lived long enough to regret it. The room went completely still. I stared at her. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't asking forgiveness. She was confessing, for the first time in over 50 years. And somehow, I realized this story wasn't about one monster anymore. It was about an entire family that had lived inside fear for decades. Just as I opened my mouth to ask another question, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times. Grandma looked toward it, then back at me. There was one person who tried to stop him. I froze. What? She nodded slowly. One person. Who? Her lips trembled. My youngest son. I frowned. My Uncle Michael? The uncle who had died in a car accident before I was born. Grandma began crying harder than before. No, she whispered. He didn't die in an accident. My entire body went cold. I stared at my grandmother. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed louder than anything else. I'm sorry, I said slowly. What did you just say? She wiped her face with a trembling hand. Michael, my uncle, the son I'd never met, the uncle everyone spoke about with sadness, the one who had supposedly died in a drunk driving accident at 26. Didn't die the way you've always been told. Every story I'd ever heard flashed through my mind. The accident, the rain, the highway, the police report, the closed casket because of the damage. It had become family history, untouchable. What really happened? Grandma looked exhausted, like every sentence physically hurt her. I don't know everything. What do you mean you don't know? I only know, she swallowed, what he told me the night before he died. I leaned closer. What did he say? She looked toward the hallway as if she expected someone to walk in. Even now, even after Grandpa had been dead for 4 years, she still looked afraid. He came here. She pointed toward the front door. It was late, almost midnight. He was furious. I had never seen him like that. What happened? He told me, another long pause, that he couldn't stay quiet anymore. My pulse quickened. About Linda? About Susan? I felt sick. He knew? He had figured it out. How? Susan finally told him. Everything froze. You mean? Grandma nodded. She trusted Michael. The words settled heavily between us. For the first time, someone in that house hadn't stayed silent. What did he do? He confronted his father. My breathing stopped. When? The next morning. And? Grandma closed her eyes. I wasn't there. What happened? He left. And? She whispered. He never came home. I frowned. The accident. That's what they said. What do you mean they? The police. Didn't you believe them? She looked at me for a long time. Then she quietly asked, Have you ever noticed that no one in this family ever talks about that accident? I searched my memory. She was right. We spoke about Michael, never about how he died. Never. Not once. It was always, he passed away, or we lost him. Never details, never questions, never stories. Grandma, she interrupted, I asked for the investigation report. And? They told me it was closed. So? They wouldn't let me see it. What? They said, she looked ashamed, they'd misplaced part of the file. I blinked. That doesn't happen. It did. What about witnesses? There weren't any. The other driver? There wasn't one. I frowned harder. So, he supposedly drove off the road, by himself, late at night. No witnesses, no reconstruction, no photographs. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. It sounded convenient, too convenient. I'm not saying someone killed him, Grandma said carefully. I don't know. But I know one thing. What? The last thing Michael ever said to me. Her voice became almost a whisper. If anything happens to me, she looked directly into my eyes. Don't let him be alone with Susan. The room seemed to tilt. What? I thought he was angry. I thought he was exaggerating. I thought, she started crying again. I thought there would be another morning. Neither of us spoke. After several minutes, I quietly asked, Did Susan ever know? She nodded. She blamed herself. My heart broke. Why? Because Michael died trying to protect her. I covered my mouth. 35 years. 35 years she'd carried that, thinking someone died because he believed her. No wonder she'd never married. No wonder she'd disappeared into herself. Some wounds don't bleed. They become entire lives. Grandma stood slowly. My knees, she smiled weakly, aren't what they used to be. She shuffled toward an old wooden cabinet near the fireplace, opened the bottom drawer, reached inside. When she returned, she carried a faded cardboard box. She placed it gently on the coffee table. I've never shown anyone this. I looked inside. Letters, old photographs, newspaper clippings, and one yellow envelope. Across the front in black ink were 3 words. If something happens. My heart raced. Michael wrote this? She nodded. He gave it to me. When? The day before he died. I stared at the envelope. You never opened it? No. Why? Because he told me not to. What? He said, she smiled sadly, only open it if I don't come home. And you didn't? I couldn't. For 35 years? I was afraid. Afraid. That word again. Fear had ruled this family longer than love ever had. I picked up the envelope. The paper had become brittle with age. The seal was still intact. My hands trembled. Should we? Grandma nodded once. I think it's time. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, just 2 pages. The handwriting was strong, confident, nothing like someone expecting to die. I began reading aloud. Mom, if you're reading this, something went wrong. Don't let Dad tell you I imagined things. Don't let him convince everyone Susan is confused. I believe her. Linda wasn't lying either. Neither of them deserved what happened. I'm going to confront him tomorrow. If he admits it, maybe there's still a chance to save this family. If he doesn't, then I'm taking Susan and leaving. Don't try to stop me. There was a long blank space, then one final paragraph. If I don't come back, don't believe the first story you hear. I stopped reading. My hands were shaking so violently the paper rattled. What does that mean? Grandma whispered. I've asked myself that every day. I looked back at the letter. There was something tucked behind it, a folded receipt, old, yellow. I unfolded it. It wasn't a receipt. It was a motel reservation. 1 room, 3 guests, Michael, Susan, and someone named Daniel. Who's Daniel? Grandma frowned. I don't know. You've never heard the name? She slowly shook her head. No. The reservation date matched the day Michael died. My pulse quickened. 3 people had planned to leave town. Only 1 supposedly died. Where had the other 2 gone? Or had they ever arrived? Suddenly another thought hit me. Grandma? What? If Michael really planned to leave with Susan, she nodded, then where was Susan the day he died? Her face lost all color. She whispered, I don't remember. That answer made no sense. A sister disappears with her brother. He dies. She comes home. How could no one remember? Unless... Someone had made sure they didn't ask. Just then my phone buzzed. Rachel. I answered immediately. Emily, she sounded terrified. Where are you? At Grandma's. Get out. What? Right now. Why? Her breathing was ragged. I just got a call from Aunt Susan. I stood up. What did she say? Rachel's voice cracked. She said... A pause. Someone broke into her house this morning. My stomach dropped. They didn't steal anything. Then why? Rachel whispered 5 words that made every instinct inside me scream. They were looking for papers. The drive to Aunt Susan's house should have taken 25 minutes. Rachel made it in 18. I don't remember much about those 18 minutes except gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers went numb. Every traffic light felt like an insult. Every slow driver felt unbearable. My phone stayed connected to Rachel the entire time. Neither of us spoke much. Sometimes silence says everything. When I finally turned onto Susan's street, I immediately saw 2 police cars parked in front of her small brick house. The front door was open. A uniformed officer stood on the porch speaking with someone inside. Rachel's car was already there. She jumped out before I had even parked. Emily! She ran toward me. Is she okay? Rachel nodded quickly. She's shaken. She looked toward the house. But she's alive. Alive. The fact that Rachel had chosen that word instead of fine made my stomach tighten. A female officer met us at the front steps. Family? Yes. She looked down at her notebook. Miss Susan Carter asked specifically for Emily. I exchanged a glance with Rachel. Specifically for me? Why? The officer led us inside. Nothing appeared stolen. The television was still there. The silverware cabinet hadn't been opened. Even Susan's purse sat untouched on the hallway table. Yet the house looked disturbed. Drawers hung open. Books covered the floor. Every picture frame had been removed from the walls. The office at the back of the house looked as though someone had searched every inch of it. The officer noticed me looking. They were selective. What do you mean? They ignored electronics. They ignored jewelry. She pointed toward an overturned filing cabinet. They only searched places where documents might be kept. Exactly what Rachel had said. They hadn't come to steal. They had come looking. For papers. Susan sat quietly in the dining room, wrapped in a gray blanket. She looked much older than I remembered. Her hair had turned almost completely white. Her hands trembled around a cup of untouched tea. When she saw me, she tried to smile. It lasted only a second. You came. I walked over and hugged her. She felt unbelievably fragile. I'm so sorry. She gently squeezed my hand. I knew this day would come. I froze. What? She motioned toward the officers. They're almost finished. I'd rather wait. Wait? For what? 20 minutes later, the police finally left. One officer handed Susan his business card. If you remember anything else... She nodded politely. The front door closed. The house became silent. No one spoke for several moments. Finally, Susan stood, locked the front door, closed every curtain in the living room. Then she looked at me. Did Rachel tell you about the journals? I nodded. She closed her eyes. I was hoping she'd never find them. Why? Because once someone reads them, she looked toward the dark window, they start asking questions. I thought of Michael's letter, the motel reservation, the missing investigation file. We already have questions. I know. She slowly sat back down, and I think, she took a deep breath, it's finally time someone answered them. Rachel and I exchanged nervous glances. Susan disappeared into the hallway. When she returned, she carried an old metal cash box. Unlike Grandma's cookie tin, this box had a lock. She unlocked it with a tiny brass key she wore around her neck. Inside were dozens of envelopes, photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, bank statements, and one thick manila folder. She placed the folder on the coffee table. I've carried this for 36 years. I stared at it. What is it? My insurance. Against what? She gave a bitter smile. Against dying before anyone believed me. The words hit me harder than I expected. She untied the string around the folder. Inside were copies. Everything was copies. Medical reports, police reports, letters, journal pages, every document carefully organized. Why copies? Because the originals disappeared. My pulse quickened. Disappeared? Several times. Rachel frowned. What do you mean, several times? Susan leaned back. The first time, she paused, was after Michael died. The room became completely still. I kept everything, she tapped the folder. My medical records, my diary, Michael's letters, everything. One afternoon, she looked down at her hands. I came home from school. My bedroom had been searched, just like today. I looked around the room. The exact same pattern. Nothing valuable missing, only papers disturbed. What happened? My diary was gone. My heart sank. Did you call the police? She laughed softly, without humor. And tell them what? Someone stole the diary where I described my own father abusing me. None of us answered. She continued. The second time, she swallowed, was after Grandma moved houses. The moving company claimed one box disappeared. What was inside? My therapy notes. Rachel whispered, That's impossible. Susan slowly shook her head. No, it wasn't impossible. It was intentional. A chill ran through me. Someone had been cleaning up evidence for decades. Who? Grandpa? Someone else? Who knew about the folder? Susan looked at me. Very few people. Grandma, Michael, my therapist, and one detective. I frowned. Detective? She nodded. I tried reporting everything. When? 1994. What happened? He believed me. For a brief moment, hope appeared. Really? He reopened Michael's case. I leaned forward. And? He retired 6 months later. What? The investigation disappeared. Again. Everything disappeared. Reports, evidence, questions, people. It felt impossible. Until Susan quietly said something that explained far more than I wanted to hear. Our town wasn't very big. I understood immediately. Everyone knew everyone. The sheriff, the pastor, the judge, the banker, the mayor. Small towns protect reputations. Sometimes better than they protect children. Susan stood and walked toward the fireplace. Above it hung the only photograph left on the wall. Grandpa, Grandma, all 5 children. Taken in 1978. She carefully removed it, reached behind the frame, and pulled out another envelope. I hid this where no one would think to look. What is it? A photograph. She handed it to me. At first, it looked ordinary. Grandpa standing beside his truck, Michael next to him, both smiling. Then I turned it over. There was writing on the back. Not Grandpa's handwriting, Michael's, the day before everything changed. I felt goosebumps rise across my arms. Below the sentence was another line. If anything happens to me, ask Daniel. Daniel, the same name from the motel reservation. Rachel looked at me. Who's Daniel? Susan's eyes filled with tears. My best friend. Where is he? She slowly looked away. I don't know. What do you mean? He disappeared. When? The day after Michael died. I frowned. People don't just disappear. He packed one suitcase, closed his apartment, quit his job, and no one ever saw him again. The room fell silent. One man dead, another vanished. The same week. Both connected to Michael, both connected to the family secret. Coincidence no longer seemed possible. Then, Susan said something that completely changed the direction of the story. I've been lying to everyone. Rachel and I looked at her. What? She nodded slowly. For 36 years. What did you lie about? She looked directly at me. I wasn't supposed to survive that day. I felt my heart stop. What day? The day Michael died. A tear rolled down her cheek. I was in the car with him. Neither Rachel nor I could speak. The accident, she whispered, never happened the way they told you. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid of my grandfather anymore. I was afraid of my own family. Once the truth is spoken aloud, it doesn't disappear. It demands a response. And I already knew what that response would be. Silence. The next morning, my mother called before I even got out of bed. Her voice sounded strangely cheerful. "Are you coming for dinner tonight?" As if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't watched me walk out of her living room with tears streaming down my face only 12 hours earlier. I closed my eyes. "I don't think that's a good idea." There was a pause. "You really need to stop making everything into such a big deal." There it was again, that sentence. The sentence everyone in my family used whenever something uncomfortable threatened their version of reality. Don't make a scene. Don't ruin the family. Don't dig into the past. Don't ask questions. I realized something that morning. My family didn't fear conflict. They feared truth. Because conflict eventually ends, truth stays forever. That evening, my cousin Emma texted me, "Can we talk?" We met at a small coffee shop across town. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. Finally, she whispered, "You know about Uncle David now?" I nodded. She looked around before leaning closer. "There were others." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She looked down at the table. "I don't know everything. But Grandma used to warn us." "Warn us?" "She never left us alone with him." I froze. "What?" "When we were little, she'd suddenly find excuses. 'Come help me in the kitchen. Stay with your cousins. Don't go upstairs.'" Emma's eyes filled with tears. I never understood why. But she knew. The words echoed in my head. She knew. Not suspected. Knew. I couldn't breathe. "If she knew," I whispered, "why didn't she stop him?" Emma didn't answer. Because she didn't have one. Neither did I. That conversation haunted me for days, because it destroyed another illusion. I had spent my entire life believing monsters look different, that they're easy to identify, that good families protect children. Reality wasn't nearly that simple. Sometimes families protect reputations, sometimes traditions, sometimes memories, sometimes dead people, and children pay the price. 3 days later, I decided to visit my aunt, the one everyone believed had been abused. She opened the door looking surprised. She was in her 60s now, soft-spoken, always smiling, the kind of woman who apologized when someone bumped into her. She invited me inside. We talked about ordinary things, the weather, her garden, her grandchildren. Neither of us mentioned why I had really come, until finally I asked, "Aunt Carol." She looked up. "I know." Her smile disappeared instantly. She didn't ask what I knew. She already understood. The silence between us lasted almost a minute. Then she whispered, "So they finally told someone." Not, "They finally believed me." Not, "They finally admitted it." Just, "They finally told someone." That sentence broke my heart, because it meant she'd waited decades, for someone to simply acknowledge what had happened. "I don't want details," I said quietly. "You never have to tell me anything." She smiled sadly. "Thank you." Until that moment. She stood and walked toward an old bookshelf. From between 2 photo albums, she pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age. She hesitated before handing it to me. "I've never shown anyone this." Inside was a letter, written decades ago, addressed to my grandmother. It was from Aunt Carol. She'd written exactly what had happened. She'd begged for help. She'd begged to be believed. At the bottom, my grandmother had written one sentence in pencil: "We cannot destroy this family." That was it. Nothing else. No comfort, no protection, no justice. Just, "We cannot destroy this family." I stared at those words until they blurred. The family had already been destroyed. The only question was who they chose to sacrifice to keep pretending otherwise. Aunt Carol gently took the letter back. I kept it because one day I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. I reached across the table and held her hand. "You weren't." She nodded. "I know that now." Then she looked directly into my eyes. "But it took 50 years. 50 years. Imagine carrying that alone for half a century." As I drove home, one thought wouldn't leave me. How many families were doing this right now? How many children had spoken, only to be told, "Don't talk about it. It'll ruin the family. He's changed. It wasn't that bad. Let's remember the good." Maybe that's why stories matter, because sometimes someone hears one and realizes they're not alone. Welcome to Stories of the Unbroken. If you've ever discovered that someone you trusted wasn't who you believed they were, you'll understand what happened next. Because I wasn't finished uncovering the truth. I was about to find something hidden in my grandmother's attic, something no one knew still existed, and it would force my entire family to confront a secret they had buried for over 40 years. The attic smelled like dust, cedar wood, and forgotten Christmas decorations. I hadn't been up there since I was a teenager. After my grandmother died, no one ever bothered cleaning it out. My mother always said she'd get around to it someday. Someday never came. Now I understood why. Some rooms stay closed because people are busy. Others stay closed because people are afraid of what's inside. I climbed the narrow wooden stairs with a flashlight in one hand and a pair of old work gloves in the other. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, just answers, because every answer I'd found so far had created 3 new questions. The attic was exactly as I remembered. Old trunks, boxes filled with photo albums, Christmas ornaments wrapped in newspaper from the 1980s, my grandfather's military uniform hanging inside a garment bag. Nothing looked unusual until I noticed one cabinet. It was locked. That surprised me. Everything else up there had been left open for decades. Why lock one cabinet? I found the tiny brass key taped underneath one of the shelves. Someone clearly wanted it hidden, but not permanently. Almost like they expected one particular person to find it one day. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. Inside were dozens of folders, each carefully labeled. Insurance, taxes, property records, medical documents. My grandmother had organized everything with incredible precision. Then, at the very back, a plain brown envelope. No label, no date, only one handwritten word: private. I stared at it for several seconds before opening it. Inside were 3 things: a family photograph, a cassette tape, and another letter. This one wasn't addressed to anyone. It simply began, "If you're reading this, then the truth finally matters more than protecting appearances." My heart began pounding. The handwriting belonged to my grandmother. She explained that she had written the letter years after my grandfather died. She never mentioned specific names. She never described exactly what had happened. Instead, she described herself. A mother who had made terrible choices. A woman who believed silence could keep a family together. A wife who convinced herself that looking away was somehow an act of love. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. Then I reached one paragraph that left me frozen. I thought I was protecting my children. In reality, I was protecting myself from admitting I had failed them. I read that sentence 3 times, because suddenly everything made sense. Silence wasn't always loyalty. Sometimes, silence was guilt. I sat on the attic floor for nearly an hour, not crying, not speaking, just thinking. People love simple stories. Heroes, villains, good parents, bad parents. Real families rarely work that way. My grandmother wasn't evil. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't heartless. She was weak, and weakness can destroy lives just as completely as cruelty. That realization hurt more than anything else I'd learned, because I had loved her deeply. I still did. But now, I had to love her honestly, not the imaginary version, the real one. The cassette tape bothered me. I almost left it untouched. Maybe some things should stay buried. Then I remembered something Aunt Carol had said. The hardest part wasn't what happened. It was everyone pretending it didn't. I couldn't become another person pretending, so I took the tape home. Finding a cassette player in 2026 wasn't exactly easy. I ended up borrowing one from a local library. The librarian smiled. "Haven't seen one of these in years." Neither had I. That evening I sat alone in my apartment. Lights off, curtains closed. The old player clicked. Static filled the room. Then, my grandmother's voice. I'd almost forgotten what she sounded like. Soft, gentle, exactly the voice that used to read bedtime stories to me. For a few seconds she talked about ordinary things. The weather, her flowers, my grandfather's birthday. Then her tone changed. If anyone is listening to this, it means I didn't have the courage while I was alive. I felt goosebumps cover my arms. She never confessed to a crime. She never admitted details. But she admitted something else. She admitted choosing comfort over confrontation. She admitted convincing herself that preserving the family was more important than exposing the truth. Then she said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. The children paid the price for the adults' silence. I paused the recording. I couldn't listen anymore, not yet, because suddenly, every holiday, every family dinner, every smiling photograph looked completely different. That weekend, my mother called again. This time she sounded irritated. "Where have you been?" I answered honestly. "Grandma's attic." Silence, longer than usual. Then, "What exactly were you doing up there?" It wasn't curiosity, it was fear. For the first time, my mother sounded afraid.
Not angry. Afraid. I didn't answer her question. Instead, I asked one of my own. "Did you know Grandma left letters?" Nothing. Not even breathing. Finally, she whispered, "You should leave the past alone." There it was again. The family motto. Leave it alone. Forget it. Move on. Pretend. I looked at the cassette recorder still sitting on my kitchen table. Then I quietly replied, "I think that's exactly what everyone has been doing for 40 years. She hung up without another word. For the first time in my life, I realized something important. People who fear the truth usually know exactly where it's buried. And my mother had just confirmed I was digging in the right place. I didn't call my mother back. For the first time in my life, I let the silence belong to her. Normally, I would have apologized, even when I hadn't done anything wrong. Even when I was the one who left conversations crying. That was how our family worked. The person who confronted the problem became the problem. The person who caused it stayed comfortable. Not anymore. 3 days later, another message arrived. Not from my mother. From someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 8 years. My oldest cousin, Jason. His text was only 6 words. "Can we meet? It's about Grandpa." My heart immediately started racing. Until then, everyone in the family had either denied everything or avoided me completely. Why was Jason reaching out now? We met after work at a quiet diner outside town. Jason looked older than I remembered. Not older in years, older in weight. Like he'd been carrying something invisible for a very long time. After the waitress left, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me and asked, "You found out?" I nodded. He rubbed both hands across his face. "I always wondered who would be first." "What do you mean?" He sighed. "I mean, the family knew this couldn't stay buried forever." I stared at him. "You knew too?" He looked ashamed. "I knew pieces." "Not everything." "But enough." I felt anger rising inside me. "You watched everyone pretend nothing happened?" He shook his head. "I was 13 when Aunt Carol finally told me." "I wanted to tell everyone." "But Grandma begged me not to." He laughed bitterly. "She said exposing it would destroy the family." I stared at my untouched coffee. "No," I whispered. "What destroyed the family was what happened before anyone ever spoke." Jason looked at me for several long seconds, then quietly said, "You're right." He reached into his backpack. "I brought something." It was an old family photo album. At first, I didn't understand why. We had dozens of those. He opened it carefully. Every page was filled with birthdays, Christmas mornings, family vacations, smiling faces. Then he pointed to one photograph. I almost missed it. My grandfather stood in the background. Everyone else was smiling, except Aunt Carol. She couldn't have been more than 11. She wasn't looking at the camera. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was staring directly at the floor. Jason whispered, "I never noticed it until after she told me." I kept flipping, birthday after birthday, holiday after holiday. The same expression, every single time. Children tell the truth, long before they have words. Adults simply stop noticing. I've hated these photographs for years. Jason closed the album. They look happy. They're lying. That sentence stayed with me. Pictures don't always preserve memories. Sometimes, they preserve performances. Before we left, Jason asked me something unexpected. "Are you going to tell everyone?" I didn't answer immediately, because honestly, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to expose everything. Part of me wanted to disappear. He nodded. I understand. Then he said something that completely changed how I saw the situation. You don't owe the family your silence. But you also don't owe them a public trial. That was the first advice anyone had given me that didn't feel like pressure. That night, I listened to the rest of my grandmother's cassette. This time, I made it all the way through. Near the end, her voice became weaker. I hope someday my grandchildren choose differently than I did. I paused, my eyes filled with tears. She knew. She knew she had failed. Not because she caused the abuse, because she chose silence afterward. Her final words were barely audible. If telling the truth costs you your place in the family, tell it anyway. The tape clicked. It was over. I sat there in complete silence. The woman I loved most as a child had spent the end of her life wishing she had been braver. That realization broke me. 2 days later, my mother appeared at my apartment. She didn't call first. She simply knocked. When I opened the door, she looked exhausted. Then Aunt Carol looked around the table. I don't need everyone to understand. I don't even need everyone to believe me anymore. She smiled through tears. I just needed to stop pretending. I realized then that speaking wasn't about changing everyone's mind. Sometimes, it's simply refusing to lie anymore. One by one, people began talking. Not arguing, talking. An older cousin admitted she'd always suspected something. Another aunt confessed she'd ignored warning signs because she didn't know what to do. Even my uncle quietly admitted, I wish I'd asked more questions. Nobody defended my grandfather. Not anymore. That surprised me most. For decades, everyone acted like they couldn't face the truth. In reality, many of them had simply been waiting for someone else to speak first. Silence had been holding everyone hostage. After dinner, I walked outside alone. The cold air felt strangely peaceful. A few minutes later, my mother joined me. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself. When you were little, I always told you our family was strong. I nodded. She looked up at the stars. I finally understand. We weren't strong. We were quiet. There was a difference. A very expensive difference. She turned toward me. I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive me. I appreciated her honesty. I don't know if I can either. She nodded. I know. Then she said something I hadn't expected. But if you ever have children, teach them to tell the truth, even if it embarrasses the family. I looked at her. For the first time, I wasn't looking at the mother who always had the answers. I was looking at a woman trying, very late in life, to become someone better. Maybe that mattered. Maybe it didn't erase anything. But it mattered. As we walked back inside, I noticed something strange. There was no annual speech this year. No celebration of my grandfather. No carefully edited stories. Instead, people talked honestly. About the good, about the harm, about regret, about responsibility. It wasn't a comfortable evening, but it was the first honest family gathering I'd ever attended. And somehow, it felt more respectful than every perfect memorial before it. When I drove home, I realized something. I hadn't lost my family that night. I'd lost the illusion of my family. Those aren't the same thing. Sometimes, the truth doesn't destroy relationships. It simply reveals which ones were real to begin with. There was only one chapter left. 6 months later, I would receive a letter that finally answered the question I'd been asking myself since the beginning. How do you remember someone who was both deeply loved and deeply harmful? 6 months passed. Life didn't magically become easier. It almost never does after the truth comes out. Movies end with dramatic confrontations. Real life begins after them. The phone stopped ringing as often. Some relatives still refused to speak to me. A few quietly unfriended me on social media. Others pretended none of it had ever happened. That used to bother me. Now, it didn't. Because peace built on pretending was never really peace. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting looked familiar. It took me a second to realize why. It belonged to Aunt Carol. I made a cup of tea before opening it. Something told me this wasn't going to be an easy read. She began with one sentence. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. I kept reading. When I was 12 years old, I stopped believing adults could protect children. When nobody believed me, I also stopped believing my own voice mattered. She wrote that after our memorial dinner, something changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, quietly. Several cousins had called her afterward. Not to ask questions, not to defend anyone, just to say, we're sorry. She wrote that no apology could erase childhood, but being believed, even decades later, allowed something inside her to finally rest. I cried harder reading that letter than I had cried during the entire investigation. Because sometimes, healing doesn't begin with justice. Sometimes, it begins with finally being believed. A few weeks later, Aunt Carol invited me to meet her at a small park. The same park where my grandfather used to teach me how to ride a bicycle. Life has a strange sense of irony. We sat on a wooden bench, watching children play. After a long silence, she smiled. You know, I don't think about him every day anymore. I looked at her. I used to. I used to relive everything constantly. But now, she watched two little girls chasing each other across the grass. Now I think about my grandchildren instead. It sounded simple, but I understood. For 40 years, her past had stolen her future. Now, she was getting pieces of it back. Not everyone changed. Some relatives continued insisting everything should have stayed private. One uncle still refused to speak to Aunt Carol. Another accused me of destroying family traditions. At first, the words hurt. Then I realized something. People often mistake accountability for cruelty. They're not the same thing. Truth feels cruel, only to people who benefited from the lie. My mother surprised me the most. She started seeing a therapist, not because anyone forced her, because she finally admitted she couldn't keep living with what she'd carried. We weren't suddenly close. We didn't become the perfect mother and daughter. Healing isn't a movie montage. Some conversations remained awkward. Some wounds remained open. But something important changed. For the first time in my life, she stopped asking me to protect her from uncomfortable truths. Instead, she began facing them herself. That was enough. For now. One afternoon, she handed me another box. I found these while cleaning. Inside were dozens of old family photographs. I expected her to ask if we should throw them away. Instead, she asked, "What do we do with memories like these?" It was the same question I'd been asking myself since the beginning. How do you remember someone who gave you love and caused unimaginable harm? I thought for a long time before answering. Finally, I said, "We don't erase the good, but we don't erase the truth either. Both can exist. Both are real. Ignoring either one creates another lie." She nodded. Then we quietly sorted the photographs together. Some we kept. Some we donated to the Historical Society. Some we simply let go. Not because we wanted to erase history, because history had finally been told honestly. A year after everything happened, the family stopped holding the annual memorial dinner. Instead, they started something new. Every November, they gathered at a local children's advocacy center. They volunteered, cooked meals, raised money, read books to children waiting for court appointments. Nobody gave speeches. Nobody rewrote history. Nobody pretended. They simply tried, in some small way, to become the kind of adults they wished had existed decades earlier. The first time I walked through those doors, I saw Aunt Carol laughing with a little girl who couldn't have been older than 8. It struck me then. Her childhood had been stolen, but she refused to let that theft define the rest of her life. That was courage. Sometimes people ask me, "Do you still love your grandfather?" I never know how to answer quickly, because love isn't always simple. People are capable of kindness and terrible cruelty. Remembering one doesn't erase the other. What I know is this: I no longer honor him. I honor the people who survived him. I honor the little girl who waited 40 years to be believed. I honor every family member who finally chose truth over comfort. And I honor the version of myself who stopped confusing silence with peace. If you're carrying a family secret that makes you question your own memories, please hear this. You are not responsible for protecting someone else's reputation at the cost of your own reality. Families heal through honesty, not through silence. Silence may keep everyone sitting at the same dinner table, but truth is what finally lets people breathe. Thank you for spending this time with me. Welcome to Stories of the Unbroken, where ordinary people find extraordinary courage, and where the truth, no matter how painful, always deserves a voice. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever discovered that someone you admired wasn't who you thought they were? How did you move forward? And if stories about family, resilience, and finding the strength to speak when silence feels easier mean something to you, subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones